Microsoft Production Studios is, which is, I guess in the vernacular, a corporate communications production studio, but it's a full service studio, as you'll see by some of the pictures here. And then after the team there introduces what the project is, a little bit about what Microsoft Production Studios does, and how big of a scale of a project this really is. Then we'll come back and they'll go through the plans and the timelines, and you can get a sense of how many things are going on, how many moving parts there are to this incredibly challenging project that we've been on for, it's coming on 2 years now, I think, since the first assessment and so forth. So that's where we're headed. This is their building. I mean, this is part of their building. Full studio with LED background wall. It's about, John Ball will be able to tell you a little bit more about this. A psych, as you can tell, there's a total of 4 studios of different scales. A lot of rental space is put in here because they're constantly reinventing the wheel with their productions and so forth. So much of this change is a permanent change from SDI to IP, there's a lot that still has to go on the peripheral that we're interfacing as well. So I'm going to turn it over to John Ball and Jack Clawson and Andrew Conrad, who are the key architects and participants in this project, for a few minutes. Go ahead, John.
Good afternoon, everybody. A description of what Production Studios is. It's a 65,000 square foot facility that opened in 1996 on the Redmond campus here in Redmond, Washington. The building itself, like I said, 65,000 square feet. It houses 4 large sound stages, 4 PCRs, 4 ACRs, broadcast operation centers for transmission and streaming. And then during the pandemic, Microsoft moved from in-person events to an all-digital, going from an in-person to a virtual. And all of the virtual events were then hosted out of our production facilities, what we call Building 127 and here in Redmond. For us, to have to do the updates that we're doing, it really was all about capacity and the flexibility that Karl mentioned. We are constantly reinventing the wheel with our events, with our productions. Generally anywhere year over year, we have about 3,000 productions that we do in the facility. And with that, we've currently hit the ceiling with what we can do. And the answer for us was to begin the shift to 2110 in a large scale. And hopefully as we get through it and we get the kinks worked out, it gives us the flexibility to do even more events, more production related portions of the events, partly as we return to in-person, but it's going to be more of a hybrid. It's going to be a hybrid of virtual and in-person as we move forward. That kind of sums up what we do. Jack, is there anything you want to include in that?
That's a pretty good high-level synopsis. We've had an incredible history here, though. Actually, fortunately, John and I have been here since the real early days, where we had quite a lot of team that actually formed there that really started MSNBC, and the studios building here was just getting started. And then I came on board to work building the facility, and John came on board, and then later Andrew, which has brought us through many transitions throughout the years, and many really amazing partnerships through reinventing all sorts of different ways we do broadcast, really throughout the history of this building, with many partners for all of the events we do. We cover a lot of services for executive communications, marketing, global events, do some remote productions that are all based out of here. We have a pretty large campus that we have fiber connectivity all over that we actually do a lot of events from as well. So really we have an extended capacity with all of our transmission and broadcast resources, and we're really a major streaming center and the portal for Microsoft Communications. So, and I wish I could have been there with you guys, but we literally are right smack dab in the middle of trying to actually do this transition. Obviously, you can imagine how challenging it has been. So, and all of us are really working hard. But I really wish I could have been there, because I've been participating with the VSF group for many years, and would love to have visited with a lot of you folks there, because we have a lot of challenges that, we're still working through, but, we're trying to move forward. So thanks for doing this, Karl, as well.
Anything you'd like to add, Andrew Conrad?
No, I think you guys summed it up really well. So
Back to you, Karl.
Andrew's probably busy. So as was explained, this is a monumental process that not just included the area inside 65,000 square foot building, but had to deal with the conference centers throughout the campus, the various small venues that they have. And any of you that have been to Microsoft know how big and how far spread out that is. So everything is ultimately going away from SDI to IP when this project's done, and we're probably 2/3 of the way through this project entirely right now. So the next part of this is, next sections of this is not going to be as technical as you might have expected. It's really looking at how we had to develop workflows and address all of the myriad of items that come up when you normally design a facility and then you throw the curveball at you called supply chain, and it turned the whole project upside down on a regular basis. It was literally like putting things in a blender and spinning it around and seeing what comes back out. What we started with was, it actually began at this conference in 2020 with a discussion that I had with these people that you just saw, sans John Ball. But we went down to the chart house and sat in an evening and decided and began to open the discussion as what do we really need to do long term. I've been involved in 3 serious consulting level projects with this Microsoft Studios for a number of years. And every one of those have been forward looking, like 3 to 5 year plans. So that's really was the idea here. We proposed an assessment process and a way to go about this, which was a series of workshops, some broad set workshops and some of them very deep dive type workshops where as we progressed and did the 5 main areas of workshops and so forth, we picked out really key important points that would have to be addressed in not just doing the IP infrastructure update, but really the operational models for the facility. And this is just a sample of one of the sections of how we went about this process. I'm not going to go through the details in it, but the applications were very detailed. The workshops were anywhere from 2 to 4 hours at a time and included most of the senior staff members that could contribute, because what we wanted to hear as a company to do a true assessment was all the pain points, all the wish lists, all the things we wish we could do but can't, and where each individual group or department thought they would be in 1 to 3 more years from a production standpoint. And they're changing their productions all the time. I bring this crazy little crossing the chasm diagram up because you can see where the star is about where most of the industry is an early majority adopters, meaning that there's a lot of facilities that are still SDI, but there's the majority of the facilities that have been built in 2110 so far have literally been greenfield facilities. The challenge on this was, how do you do this while they continue to do production and without stop downs, without long periods of time where we can't halt the production, or on the other side, halt our activities as far as people. We probably have 18 to 20 some people on site and have been for many, many months doing the fiber infrastructure and so forth. And it's kind of funny because this is a very famous diagram, although I added the alligator part to it because that crossing the chasm probably goes way out beyond the late majority. This has been quite the chasm. Lots of alligators. So this is kind of there's about 5 slides here that continue left to right as I go through them, but you can see that this assessment program started in the latter end of 2021. What we addressed on that were, as the timeline went from left to right here, is we had to pick some key vendors and develop some proof of concept studies of them. We looked at a number of different manufacturers for most of the products, including the switches and the broadcast control system or orchestration system. Somewhere around the middle of this assessment, we got hit with the whammy, the double whammy. Not only do we have to sort of select who the vendors would be, we had to start ordering things. In particular, the Arista switches, the first set of Arista switches. At the same time, we got challenged with having to build and replace an intercom system, a complete audio system, and a complete KVM system, all of which were either end of life or would not make the easy transition from that current product line to what they wanted to do with IP. So we initiated the concepts, developed a basis of design, ordered the switches, and then began constructing the phase one systems architecture. Before there was really a design on paper, each little section system was designed by itself. For example, the audio systems, we knew we'd make a transition to them long after we put both the intercom and the Lavo audio gear in, and everything in audio was replaced. Nothing was retained except little stage monitors or something of that nature. And we had to run it in I suppose the right word is Ravenna mode. It was not a -30 implementation. We knew that we would have to change IP addressing and multicast schemes once we moved the facility from a total SDI facility to an IP. So that was something that was high in our mind, is how we're going to do that and how long do we think it's going to take and what are the extra components that are going to surprise us when this happens. So this took us up through about the time that our first set of switches, which was not the complete set of switches, it was just what we could get through the combination and leveraging of both Azure and Arista, and boy, everybody came through with flying colors. The next section of this was what we started to call the Arista Phase 2 time lead, and this is where we now had a fairly accurate idea of what we were going to do system-wide, replacing all the switches that were in there. They are currently a Cisco operating system. They will eventually replace all of the Cisco gear, Cisco 9K gear, which is what handles their corporate network stuff, their file-based workflows, their editing systems, so forth, is all going to be replaced. But once Arista delivers the quantity of switches we need, and we're going to be placing 2 more orders on this. One is to do the spine and leaf red and blue network portions of it, and then eventually the full migration. So we're expecting this to, like I said, we're about somewhere around 2/3 of this of the way into this, and it will be probably the end of December before we get to the next phases and shift over things again. All the time we were doing our design development, looking at bandwidths and looking at distribution and what level of fiber and so forth in here. And we deployed the audio sections of it, 1 core and 2 or 3, I believe, Arista leaf switches, all at an audio data rate, so there wasn't a whole lot of data moving through this at the point. While at the same time that the cores started to show up, we were prepared to immediately hook them up and start connecting the audio, the intercom, and the KVM systems into this. And all of these are all IP-based now systems, whereas nothing is analog except to the connections to the servers or the monitors through the KVM. You can see that the full system design continued while we, up near the top up here, actually over in this end, where we continue to wait for the orders to sort of materialize, I guess is the best way, because delays happened all the time in this. They weren't terrible delays, and we were prepared to do this, but it means that you can only go so far with your connectivity, and you really can't check anything until the switches are in there, and they were strangely, almost some of the last things to arrive. So you can see the KVM, the intercom, and the audio continued to work, and we turned that live just using interfaces between it and SDI or AES streams that are in the existing routing switcher. And again, one of the primary core reasons for doing this project was not only was the SDI routing switchers, 4 of them, either end of life or end of support, but they were starting to flake out every once in a while, and there wasn't just enough sources for the things that they do. You heard how many 3,000 programs a year. You do the math, that's somewhere around 10 a day. And then they fully operate a BOC or a transmission TOC type of facility to stream out to the public their programming and so forth. So in addition to these things that had to do with IP, we were also contracted to look at a new digital asset management system, a true dam, which turned it into a commercial facility that things that had been previously recorded could be put together in a script and delivered on demand, an on-demand service, I guess is the best way to explain it. So you can see the Arista timeline continued, the full system designs continued, and then we got the interesting notification that they wanted to replace both the production switchers and all of the cameras. I mean, it's literally things kept stacking up and stacking up and stacking up, and while we knew we had to provide the connectivity to it, that also meant numerous numbers of shuffling of equipment around in a limited central equipment room, or what they call the hub, which was rapidly having to face the issues that we don't have sufficient power, we don't have sufficient cooling. I mean, you can do all the math you want, but you really got to put this stuff in and see where the flows are. And in some cases, cords were being run down the halls and plugged into other outlets or other boxes just to keep the system functioning. You can't do that while you're flying the airplane, or you shouldn't be doing that, but it happened. So as we got closer and closer, we picked a broadcast controller vendor who in turn provided all of the conversion gear. And the model, you probably wouldn't do this every day or think about this every day, because it does add a high degree of cost to something like this. But we figured, given the demands and how limited time we'll have at the point where the switches will arrive and we'll be connecting things up, rather than take devices that were native IP 2110 already, or being modified to have 2110 I/O on them and bring them into the system as I/O, we treated them with gateways around the input and the outputs. So it was literally every SDI port went into in this case, imagine SNP, Selenium Network Processor. So every single device had some level of SNP conversion in them. And there was a couple of reasons for that. One of them was much faster to do, despite the fact it took a lot of extra space. The SNPs will never be something that they will not use in another location in the facility as a portable device or at extensions at the conference room level. But the other side of it is, if for some crazy reason we couldn't have gotten all the products to do this, they still have a heavy-duty production schedule anyway. We had the model to go and be able to switch back to SDI from an IP infrastructure. And we got pretty darn close to this. And just literally 2 weeks ago, we put a stake in the sand and did a go, no go. This is the day, Friday afternoon at 5 o'clock. If we don't feel comfortable of moving forward with IP, out comes the IP cards out of all the production switches, back in goes SDI cards, things of that nature, because there was no other really alternatives without just shutting the entire facility down and renting mobile trucks, and we thought about that too. So in this slide, we see that all of the SNPs were being implemented, the test and measurement gear, the broadcast orchestration system was brought up and working. And we have to give kudos to Imagine in this case, because they delivered us their demo kit that they use to travel the country and show people what their products do. And that gave their technicians there an advance on what the product was going to do before they had to learn it on the real kit itself. And the result was, with Imagine's permission, they literally disassembled it and rebuilt their own sandbox so they could plug new equipment and learn and see what 2110 really does in the real world. As I said, there was this go or go no point. This is not the direction we went. It was finalized to go forward with the IP. And a lot of that was risk analysis. It was, how much are we sure we can pull back and do SDI again? The risk of the existing and aging Envision routers, would they hold up to the case? Plus, we'd already done a complete switch from the audio, which we'd have to reinvent again, which would mean stand the audio up again another way, because these were hybrid routers that would take AES in as embedded and then turn it into Maddie or Dante, depending upon which they were going to use. And all of that architecture was basically being stripped away day by day as we moved forward with IP. So the good news is we did go ahead with IP 2 or 3 weekends ago and have been moving forward. This literally is the time right now. But there were some other issues here. Again, supply chain rearing its ugly head. This is designed to be a 2022-7 facility. It's completely plumbed that way with fiber. However, Arista couldn't supply enough switches to do both a red and a blue network. So talk about a risk computation here. And we feel comfortable we can do this based upon the amount of bandwidth and so forth here, and you'll see a little bit about that in a minute. There's only one side of a red and blue network being configured. When we get the rest of the switches sometime in the August timeframe, that'll be well over a year since we've placed the first orders, then we'll build the other network up and plumb it into the system. And there's an embedded group of Arista engineers that support Azure, since Azure uses Arista for all of their cloud and web-based materials. They have been figuring out how to do automated scripts like the Ansible or Terraform type things that were discussed in order to automate this and have it be much smoother than manually entering data and so forth into it. So here's a group of people that support a cloud in a way that none of us really understand or comprehend what they do. But the long and the short of it is they're learning 2110 alongside the technical folks at the same time. So a little bit about what the architecture of the systems look like. So this was the initial core layout in broad strokes for the Ravenna portion of it, which is not a -30, by the way. And it's only the red side of the facility was built. So you see in the circle there is the diagrams for what turn out to be 4 core switches, 7808 switches from Arista for each of the red and blue sides. Now, what we haven't even mentioned yet on this is that there's a high degree of must not fail with huge underscores underneath it, and it's a financial impact to Microsoft. It should, those of you that remember when the blue screen of death, when Windows whatever it was being introduced by Bill Gates years ago, that's a sore that doesn't go away. And so bandwidth is not an object here. These are 400 gig line cards. There's 4 cores. You can see the red devices, the leaf devices that run off of this right now. And this was just the audio stand-up initially so that people could start to learn with the switches and the cores and so forth. We didn't get the other 3 cores for the red or the other 4 cores for the blue for quite a bit later from when we first stood this up. So this has been a constantly build, tear down, change, build, tear down, change process. The core layout ultimately will look like this with dual sets of very elaborate Meinberg PTP and NTP systems in here. We were talking about how do we protect things like GPS antennas and how to help with the security or mitigate the security issues as best as possible. They're doing these sorts of things. The PTP then feeds the red, the 2 sets of red. There's really 4 here. I just didn't want to confuse the diagram too much. 4 spines in red and 4 spines in blue, and then those leak down or send down through to the red for the audio and so forth. Statistics-wise, there's 32 red network Arista leafs with 32 ports on each one of them. And this is, again, just for the audio portions of it, audio and the first sets of video and so forth. 95 Imagine Selenium network processors, SNPs. Literally every device has, well, it's a multiple processor thing, so depending upon how much bandwidth is going, one might be dedicated, such as a playout server, but in many cases, multiple signals were going into the same SNP. So there were thoughts about making sure that if an SMP failed, how many things that were connected to it might be at risk of failing as well. So all of this risk analysis came out in multiple tabs on spreadsheets in order to be sure that we didn't miss the numbers. There's a mixture of single or purple-ended, purple or single-ended devices, particularly wireless intercom and so forth. And we installed roughly 21.7 miles of fiber. And it's in a combination of both single mode and multi-mode. Mainly used the multi-mode because there was a tremendous amount of fiber already installed in the facility that we had to be sure we didn't run into any roll-offs or issues with fiber connectivity and multi-mode versus single mode. Most facilities are built today on a single mode platform. So this is a more elaborate look at the overall network, and I have the X through the blue because that's not built yet. It's wired, it's cabled. There's just tons of fiber and SFPs ready to be plugged into a whole onslaught of switches when those show up in August, when it's Christmas in July or whatever. And then you can see the audio portions and the purple portions in the center of the screen here, and then the red and the blue on each side, which are the video leaf switches. So that's at a very high and not too detailed level of what this architecture looks like. People say, why 4 core switches? Well, this has really been designed with the data center concepts in mind. So 3 active and 1 active spare, 3 with flows through them and a spare should one of the other cores quit. We know that there's enough design and enough capabilities, given most of the stuff is 400 gig now, that we could boot up the other system and plug it in and just move things around. And again, hats off to the Arista and Azure people for helping the IT people that are contractors in a sense inside the organization to do this and make it as seamless as possible, because God, let's face it, the people in the cloud do this sort of stuff all the time. But it really was designed in such a way that data center concepts and principles are employed, even to the point that there is capabilities, if desired, and we've had discussions with the media people inside of Azure, that if they wanted to have a feed of every single source that's in that facility, they could do that, and then they could go learn 2110 for real. So, just some conceptual, perceptual things. Some of the early thoughts on this is when we talk about, my goodness, why do you have 16 core switches? Because I haven't even mentioned the sandbox yet. But the concept, if you throw enough bandwidth at it, nothing will fail. Well, maybe that's a cross your fingers and see how that happens. But many times we got asked in discussions, design review meetings, how complex does this have to get? Or will this be? And let's put it this way, it's very complex. It's a completely different concept of what you need to do inside of most broadcast facilities, broadcast studio, television facilities, or news facilities. But this is no simple thing to do. Lots of times, as we were progressing through the design development and using and leveraging the basis of design concepts, we found out that there were many things that we didn't even know. And we're still finding these things today, even though we've started turning up the IP systems for real, and their actual rehearsals are about ready to start if they haven't started already. And again, I mentioned earlier, this has got to have extreme reliability, and the reason we could do this is because it's the data center focus. And again, I'm not sure this was really thought to this level as we were writing the 2110 standards a number of years ago, but we made the flexibility in the standardization that we wouldn't pigeonhole ourselves or get us into a corner if we went the data center model, which is, I think, eventually where most of this is going to go. So a little bit on the timeline, the consulting assessment started in September 2021 and ended in October. So there's slightly over a year was spent identifying what needed to be done for this facility and how we might get there. We still have a laundry list that goes on, which we'll pick up sometime in December, which is the next phase of this, which is how to make this facility more efficient and allow for workflows that they've never had before. For example, one of the desires was I think they have 18 studio, or edit type studios, edit rooms, small rooms. They're used for a multitude of different things. It's not just to sit down and do Adobe editing or whatever it happens to be. They use these things during productions to put core groups that are developing programming into. Well, there's not a production switcher in each one of those things, and they're not intending to put a production switcher in each one. But before it's done, we want to be able to go to a dashboard and select Studio 4 or Control Room 4, whatever it happens to be, turn it from this mode to this mode and have that a single button push to do all the transfers and configurations. And we're still arguing about and discussing how we're going to go about doing that. It's just there's been too much focus on getting the design done and the current implementation done, but that's certainly the goal, is to make this an auditable, I guess, resource management pool that can pull from anywhere in the facility, and that's the beauty, again, in the IP concepts there. The initial shipment for the Aristas were planned in April of 2022. They weren't too far off, but again, you go rob the stores where you can and then pay them back later, and that's kind of been the idea here. We created a basis of design post-assessment, so after October or so, the next steps we needed to do is talk about what's this design going to look like. That's where we went from 2 core switches to 4 core on each side of the network, and how we architected the spine and leaf topology throughout the whole facility, because we couldn't wait for the equipment to show up and then try and run fiber. We have probably, 4 racks wide of Lisa, Hubert and Sooner Lisa cabinets that do all the cross-patching for the whole facility. And that's where the transitions from MTPs, 12s, to literally single thread fiber needs to happen, because there's a lot of bandwidth coming out. You wonder, there are 400 gig lifts to the line, to some of the leafs, but you don't run 400 gig to each device. I mean, we're never going to run 8K on steroids in this facility. We probably could, but that's not the part of the basis of the design. But we needed to know how we're going to distribute a 12-strand fiber, breaking it out so we can make the best utilization of 100 gig subgroups or below, 20 and 25. So a lot of work here. Again, can't say enough about the supply chain issues, because that drove this design, the entire implementation and scheduling and so forth, and it's still driving that design. Only the cores and 50% of the leafs could be delivered in the time frame that we needed initially, and the delays through August 2023 continue for the balance of the leafs. We're, again, crossing our fingers that those will show up on time. And we've developed, another thing that's important in this is we've developed service windows built around major productions. So they already know when their productions, like Microsoft Build and those sorts of programs, the same things that AWS does, not same, but typically similar type of programs, so that we can't do any work in that facility probably a month before each of those production windows. Although it's a 2 or 3 day production, they can bring 150 to 200 people into the facility and distribute them throughout all the various rooms in order to manage this program, which is, for the most part, done in real time. So the only time the red flag goes up that you can't go into the central equipment room, you can't touch any of the gear that would be risking a production error at any time. It's in some of the networks facilities that I've been involved in, Microsoft's got more stricter rules on it than some of these network facilities, and what you can and when you can do it. So, the broadcast controller selection process was quite interesting. There were some preferred products that Microsoft wanted because they had a strong relationship with those particular companies. It took somewhere between 3 and 4 months to make a decision, and that happened in mid-2022, ultimately being awarded to Imagine Communications and their Magellan SDNO. There's nothing really new or tricky in any of that development. We're saving that for the post-party sometime in December 2023, where we'll start looking at things that we've been bringing up to the vendors about we'd like to see capabilities. We can see in John's Mayat's been through many of our discussions and meetings already, so I have to throw the knife at you and say, come on, let's go, because the end of the year is going to come pretty fast for all of us. Again, I said that they delivered a demo system that their shop people turned into a sandbox. What I've been describing mostly so far is the production media fabric, or PMF, consisting of the 8 core switches as red and blue. There's an identical mirror of this, but not quite the scale in terms of card counts and port counts and so forth, that they're going to have for a sandbox. They literally want the same software running on a separate, unconnected, air-gapped system, so that they can understand what it takes to do a software upgrade or a conversion or add a new product. And it's literally going to be a sandbox. It's already been cabled in its initial stages, but we don't need 32 leaf switches to do a sandbox. You need 1 leaf switch, and you can replicate it the rest of the way down. But the software systems will be the same. We will work with Arista as new things come up for CVP or whatever it happens to be, and synchronize these things. It will ultimately be a very good experimental lab place that we don't have to take a risk of pulling something off the air or wiping out a program, and can go forward with it. Gone through most of these already. These are the initial upgrades. The KVM went from an analog system to the black box product line because it wanted to be all IP. The intercom and the wireless systems were awarded to Riedel and the Bolero products, and the entire audio system was awarded to Lavo, which was almost designed by another contractor at Microsoft, a brilliant guy who's really saved a lot of the audio capabilities. It stood up as Ravenna now, and it's migrating to 2110-30 as we speak, and pretty comfortable that'll be done pretty quickly. Production switches are Grass Valley K-frame. One of the switches was delivered as SDI, the other one was IP, and then a whole new set of IP cards to go in the SDI frame when SDI is completely abandoned. And the cameras are going to be Sony 4K, although we're going to only operate them in 3G or HD in the short term. The whole building is built to handle 4K, but Microsoft made a decision that too many other elements really would be required to stand up 4K and do it full time, like probably double the storage size on all the other devices that would have signal content and so forth. So, we've talked about all of these pieces already. Fiber, again, single mode and multi-mode, wasn't terribly difficult to deal with, but we were hoping we'd only have to deal with one, because there are the issues with the different types of SFPs you have to have and the signal flows. It wasn't a straightforward thing, but it got managed on spreadsheets. Excuse me. We did find some inconsistencies which were corrected by the vendors. And the upcoming conversion from Ravenna to -30 is going well. Microsoft's interesting in their staffing model. For the most part, many of the people are contractors. So they're coming in literally being managed by another firm that Microsoft then manages that firm. A little bit different. We did go through a whole new naming configurations for what was the management networks, what was the production media fabric network, and the sandbox. That was essential from the very start in order to mitigate delays or having to change documentation, and there's a ton of documentation for this facility. I mentioned the system-wide upgrade timing, these windows, service windows, and so forth. We're finding on very large-scale companies, projects that Diversified is involved in, that some of these service windows are being defined even before the facility goes on the air, because they know that they'll have things that they'll have to tweak once they turn them on, go into production, find out where there's faults. And they too, these people, can't afford any downtime. They're going to have certain things that are going to have to shift, and that whole planning process, that risk management part, is not really well understood by those that start to jump in an IP. It's just IP, right? No, it's not. For example, we couldn't get the Meinberg products for PTP until around July. And those feed through the audio leafs initially, not with audio signals in parallel with them, but that for distribution as boundary clock locations and so forth. So that's another change that's going to have to happen. We have to have a service window to do that. The 100 gig interfaces were cumbersome when you had to deal with lower bit rate, audio bit rates in the 3 megabit type framework. And then power and cooling has been a continual change. I mean, right now, as we're tuning up a system, turning it on and learning to use it, they're changing power systems because there just wasn't enough. And of course, if they're needing more power, they need more air conditioning. So that whole environment is going on. So this is a continuous process that doesn't stop. Not that you necessarily want to get it on a Boeing airplane before it was done, but the same sort of perspectives. Other issues which have impacted the migration is the continual changes in service additions, production shutdowns where we can get them are short-lived. Things like power is going to be changed. Electricians are going to show up on Saturday morning, so we have to quit working long enough in advance to safely shut the gear down and prepare it for the power migration, and then turn it back up and have it ready on Monday morning. So a lot of folks are learning what it's like to sleep on the floor of a control room. And then the demo in the sandbox was very, very much needed. If those that are thinking about a project of this scale, or even close to this scale, do yourself a favor and get the gear to test and manage it and some sort of signal system early. Put it together, put your hands on it, because you can read all you want, and I've preached this to I don't know how many people. You can read all you want, but until you put your hands on this stuff, you won't understand what it really means. So, and the same thing goes with the test and test and maintenance gear. Prisms and the leader equivalent type products are sort of like a real-time look at things, and it's 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 signals flows there at the most. We have multiple sets of PacketStorm VIP monitors in this facility so that we can continuously monitor serious flow, 128 flows at a time in one package. It can alarm on it. We can pass them through other systems. We are using the Matrix Vero system for a signal generator because you can adjust the RTP timing and see what really happens should the alpha channel and the video channel not align once it hits the switcher. You can see and play with test signals that you can't normally find in a color bar signal by any means. So lots and lots of things were given consideration with this. And the other crazy thing is router panels. We couldn't come to a conclusion as to what kind and what degree of router panels. Now, there's as many software panels, software-centric routing systems inside this facility, which we eventually want to automate in some case, in some way, shape, or form. But physical push-button panels, 24-button panels, or 32-button panels, hadn't made up a mind, and we've gone to a custom vendor. So there's limited and not nearly enough router panels in this facility yet, and that's coming. The lead times, when you hear things like 14 months lead times, believe it. I'm hoping it gets better, but there hasn't been a great deal of evidence that things are speeding up very much, and the demand is incredible. A lot of contingencies and risk management was put into this plan. So far, we haven't had to deal with any contingencies to keep this project going. Then we got a little curveball thrown at us as 2 of the lead managers retired or left the company at a point where a lot of the decision processes and the whys where decisions were made were in their heads. Extract that out, put that on a document somewhere so we can go back and refer, well, this is why we meant what we did, and so forth. And the entire tech team had no real 2110 experience. They had some 2022-6 experience, and they did have a little bit of product in that, which is being completely abandoned eventually. And then the production switchers had several delays, and lots of changes, and lots of things that, okay, here's a chassis, and it's got some cards in it, but there aren't enough cards to make it work, or some portion of that didn't work. I'll put them in anyway, we'll work around it. The consoles had to be replaced, the control panels, because they had smaller carbonite scale type switchers before, they had to be widened out, and then we found out well, we can't run the K-frame switchers because they're missing cards, despite the fact the chassis is loaded, populated, fibers to it, all the cables are running, everything. So it's take the K-frames out, build another control panel box to set the previous switcher and bring that all back up again. So it's go this far, 200 miles an hour in this direction, stop on a dime, turn it around and come back 200 miles an hour the other direction and meet a wall somewhere in the middle of it. That's been the experience here. The patience and the obligedness of the Microsoft team working with our company is unbelievable. I mean, these guys are learning stuff and touching stuff that they haven't even seen some signals run through them yet, but they're learning how to use this gear. So from a bits only type of level. So another area of concern had to do with in-band management. Microsoft tried the best and really wants to deal with in-band management, or NMOS in-band, with the media, so we aren't running separate RJ45 cables all over the building. Frankly, there wouldn't be enough space to run them. This place is already maxed out in terms of cable raceways and so forth. That posed some interesting problems that we didn't realize or recognize until we actually started turning equipment on. NMOS 04 and 05 needs to be working first and reliably and understanding what it needs to do, because a lot of the databases on these internal products depend upon, because you're going to go that way, it looks to the NMOS servers and the registries for its information before it can even build its databases. Databases aren't things, and what I mean by them are, input one is named camera 1, or button number 1 is going to be assigned, and then that's a random or dynamic signal. All of that information, you can try and build it, but you can't test it until NMOS works. So that was something we hadn't really quite expected. Have worked through it with both our design engineers finding little quirks that happen in software. I mean, it is software. And then getting the vendor to make the code change, and then things went forward. That's just about everything that's on this page here. So that's the architecture. That's what we're doing. We've been at it, again, 18 months or more already. We see this being a very long process with opportunities to do new things still. But at this point, I'm just going to turn it over to Brad and hope everybody there at Microsoft's ready to answer some questions. All right.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Jack, John, Andrew, thank you so much for being with us. We really appreciate it. John, I hope you can come back sometime to VidTrans. We'd love to have you in the future, actually all of you. And anybody in the audience, if you have questions, please go to the microphone. Oh, you can't see. We need to get that. We need to get a return feed so you can see. But people, yep, it's on. People have already jumped up and gotten in line here. So we've got quite a few. So this is if you had been at the conference attending, you would know that the agenda for the conference is kind of a running joke here. So I just want to tell you that, the timeline for the rest of the afternoon is kind of variable based on the number of people we got lined up with questions. So, but I'm going to take moderator's prerogative here and just ask a couple of questions before we go to the folks in the audience and have some questions. And one of the things that really stood out to me in this project was the question of training. And I just wonder if how has that gone? Has there been a specific approach that either Microsoft or Diversified has helped to move forward with this? Because we've talked about the systems, and the scope of the system is obviously huge, but there's a lot of people involved with this too. So is there anybody from Microsoft that would want to respond to that? Or Karl, is that a question for you? I'm not exactly sure who. Whoever would like to take that, please speak up. Go ahead.
I'll take it.
Sure.
We actually hired a company to help coordinate all of the training because of the audio guys, the video guys, the camera operators, EVS, Dreamcatcher, you name it. Any of the systems that we put in all come with the training. And right now, that's what we're doing. But having somebody actually full-time, coordinating all of that for all of the operators has been a monumental undertaking.
I'm sure it would be, but John, I'm wondering maybe even backing up from the training on the equipment, the new equipment, has there been any training about kind of IP and 2110 systems, or because you guys are, native digital folks from the beginning, it's not a training issue for you? How yeah, I see you kind of laughing there, maybe, I'm not sure. How about that side of it, just the fundamentals of IP video and audio?
We actually did do a number of training. Actually, we did it with Wes Simpson, and we've had a couple of different things. We've been talking about trying to go back and revisit that. He had the IP for broadcast and broadcast for IP sessions we did here. And then some of us who've been going back and forth to VidTran, we always, try and go to the tutorials and stuff like that. But then, other than on our own, we have done some training here. A lot of the other training we still have, want to try and anticipate getting some of it. We're really learning like OJT right now, on the job training. We have a lot of smart folks that are working together, and we're learning pretty quickly on our toes. But we do really plan on having the deep in the weeds training more, with sessions that we're trying to move forward. And one of the difficulties is that everybody's really been so swamped with, we've been reinventing all these productions really while we've been planning it with a lot of our teams. We have been anticipating this day when we were really going to be doing this for actually quite some time. But now we're in the weeds, and sometimes we're even learning the stuff that we did know. We're learning a lot more by having hands-on, and in fact, we're still in that mode right now. So, literally, so a lot of stuff you think works a certain way, but until you really get in there, and of course, there's a lot of different variables now, and really the practical applications of making things fly, so to speak. So, but yeah, there is some more of that in the weeds training, in addition to what we have for individual training as we get time to schedule for different systems. In fact, there's another engineering training coming up in just a little bit that we have been really trying to phase as much as we can with the time we have. But we're really in a crunch time right now because we are, in that discovery / readiness mode to really do some parallel broadcasts next week for full productions, and have our full teams really trying to make sure we get as much possible ready and tested within the next, really this month.
Yeah, I'm quite familiar with that. Trying to get some training in as you're driving the car down the road, as I've stayed with. We used to say at Turner, where I was from, that we used to build places, and then we would, paint the walls and all that. It almost wasn't worth painting the walls because you knew you were going to tear the wall down before the paint even dried. And trying to train in that environment is very hard. By the way, we just saw a note pop up that said this meeting ends in 5 minutes. And we have a list of some people and some more questions. So I don't know. We would hate it if you just dropped off. But anyway, let's go to the questions from the audience. If you would, just introduce yourself and then ask away, please.
Luis Gonzalez from Mozilla Quartz. Quick question. Based on the criticality of the operation and the reliability and availability demands, did you guys consider using like a cesium clock as a backup for your GPS receivers?
Did we consider using what?
A cesium atomic clock.
Oh, cesium atomic clock as a backup to the Meinbergs or what?
I don't remember if we went down that road or not, but Jack is the one that picked the PTP system. He should probably answer that.
Jack, I don't know.
I think right now we're running on the Evertz 5700s, and we're transitioning into Meinbergs. That said, we do have some resiliency with our antenna systems and the entire distribution between an A and a B GPS reference system, and then a lot of that is distributed into actually standby clock cards that we'll have in our system. So we have a main and a backup on each of those. And then Andrews has designed, quite a bit of redundancy downstream in our Arista fabric as well.
All right, thanks.
Okay, great. Thank
It'd be
you.
interesting to look into it now.
Thank you.
Hi, Jed Deem with NextEra Video. Really intrigued by the fact that you were forced to stand up a system without -7 redundancy. I'm curious what you're seeing in the way of drop packets and how equipment reacts to it. Have you seen any? Because in theory, you should be getting one about every 16 seconds.
That's the scary part that we're really trying to really get to the bottom of right now, because literally we have not fully transitioned our system. We're still just getting database updates, getting routing stuff there, and really qualifying a lot of paths. And that's really the critical part that we are concerned about, which is going to take some monitoring for some of the sustaining workflows. So yeah, that's some stuff that Andrew and I have talked about, and that's really kind of one of the things we're most nervous about.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, Thomas Edwards, Amazon Web Services. Hey, I want to thank you for presenting this, because it's not often that we see these awesome case studies of what's going on. So so thank you for showing all the good parts and all the bad parts. Obviously, Emmy Award-winning SMPTE 2110 is awesome, but I'm curious if one had to do it again, or if you ever considered taking a look at, say, a compressed workflow, say JPEG XS, NDI, maybe having software-based switchers and graphic systems rather than hardware-based systems.
Well, you can't put everything on a slide, but yes, NDI is a serious component in the facility. There's a lot of TriCaster type products already. We have explored how to do a migration system or translation system. We've explored it, but as I explained when we did the basis of design, we had to put some of the stuff on the table, knowing the aggressive schedule it was taking just to build it and keep the facility running at the same time. So J2K is a prime consideration in the production switchers portions of that. JPEG XS, I'm sorry. You guys know what I mean. And certainly the considerations for -22 are not left out in this. There's just not a whole lot there that you can do right now until or if you want to do it on a sidebar, which is one of the prime reasons I explained they put the sandbox in there, is to have that kind of a platform to see what headaches are we going to come out of it. I mean, we could run NDI through that system. We could run a translator before and after. There's all sorts of things that are coming out in the industry right now which are going to support the non-2110 world, and still run in the same kinds of fabrics.
So I think that leads directly to another question. Thomas, thank you for the great segue. You're not through this project yet, of course.
No.
But if you could rewind all the way to the beginning, which I think any of us who have been through these sorts of projects would love the opportunity to go, have the information we know now and then go back and start over. Maybe I'd like to start over when I was like 14, for example, and then start over with this knowledge. But anyway, are there some really key things that you guys would do differently?
One really big
More
one.
time in the sandbox, definitely.
You said
And
more
really
time in
more
the
thorough
sandbox,
testing.
right?
Yeah, but
Yeah.
I would like to take supply chain and put it on an anchor
Yeah.
in the middle of the Pacific somewhere, because that's been the thorn in the side of making this happen efficiently. There are so many things that we as an integrator do in a greenfield facility, and we probably could have spun a large portion of this up, shut down for 2 months or 3 months, do all the infrastructure ahead of time, and just move gear around. Didn't have that luxury. So that would be, I think, and I don't think I'd get any disagreement from Microsoft, that would be the first and foremost thing I'd like to see changed.
Yeah, and I would say supply chain affects your budget as well. It really will mess with it.
Yeah, purchasing across quarters and things, and late deliveries and extending deadlines. It's been really difficult for annual and fiscal budget boundaries.
Yeah, and I've got some bad news about that, sadly. I have a good friend of mine, he's just a personal friend, but he was the head, well, one of the top people in a steamship company, they call it, basically a shipping line.
Right.
And he's now a senior person in a port authority. And the things that he told me about what's going on in the steamship lines and in the ports around the world make me aware that this problem is not going away anytime soon. It's going to be a number of years that we're going to be dealing with these fundamental supply chain issues, and that's just a matter of the number, basically the conveyor belt of container delivery got broken, and it's a reboot, and it's going to take a long time. So that's unfortunate.
The IEEE put a segment out in one of the Explorer magazines a while ago, which was fascinating because it talked about all the elements that contribute to building a chip. We hear about, it's only about the chips, but you think of the transport of the chemicals, of the materials that go into the fabric, where they have to go, how many times, how many different places materials have to come and coordinate in together to make a single chip. And the news this morning with the no surprise, chips that are on your credit cards may not be
hard to find.
You're not going to get your credit card very soon.
Yeah.
Comes short order. So.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. One thing that we've talked about here in LA at this conference, and it came to top of mind as I was listening to you present, talking about moving from Ravenna onto a -30 network, and I assume the IP addressing changes that are coming with all of that, bringing up the other side of the leaf and so on. We had been talking about infrastructure as code and CI/CD deployments around network infrastructure. And I wonder, I think to be perfectly honest, for a lot of us that are in the media industry, this is some new terminology and some new, thinking of applying kind of a well-understood technique to our area is a new idea. Are you guys at Microsoft, have you been thinking from the beginning about this? Are you looking at administering this infrastructure this way? Any comments on that?
Yeah, I would. We've certainly been looking at that and how that may help us in the future. But for the current deployment that we're under, given the timeline that we were under and the pace that we had to move to light up a lot of this equipment, we needed to abandon going through a automated approach to some of this and go directly hands-on for a lot of it. And so we're going to have to circle back around and attack the automated side of the deployments later for any future growth and stuff in the facility.
Okay, so that's interesting and not surprising really, because it's if you don't have that stood up, that just standing up that CI/CD pipeline and getting all of your templates or playbooks or whatever developed is a major effort by itself, and trying to do that as you're also dealing with all the changes that came in this project. I'm not surprised to hear that, but it seemed like given the scope of the number of switches, the number of nodes, et cetera, that employing a CI/CD methodology to it might make sense, especially since you've got the Azure team to call on. So.
Yeah, and I remember, Andrew, when we were in the conference room and all the guys from Arista had come over to talk, and we thought about the concept of how we can make transitional changes. How would we bring up new segments of the switches? Because at that time we knew things were going to be delayed, and we could in our heads figure this out. I'm sure they've put their noodle to us a little bit, but again, there's just been so many issues, right down to training and to, what do you do with this box that just came in that is a nice looking box. It's got 2 SFP ports on the back. Now what do you do?
I would say, go ahead, Andrew.
Yeah, exactly. And, we didn't have, like has been said, everything was net new for this. So we didn't have a management infrastructure, any of that. So literally as switches were arriving, we were putting down configs on those switches so that the rest of the team could continue to move forward while we're bringing up the management pieces behind it. And if we had done the reverse of that and got management up first, put in all the automation, it would have just slowed things way down across the environment. So just the nature of the beast as it was.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I was going to say what also affected us is that when we would get ready to make the orders, we had built in kind of what we were being told the supply chain was. Once we made the order, that supply chain timeline radically changed.
Yeah.
In a very short order.
Yeah, well, that's, you're talking to a room full of people who, you know, work on live TV, and, you know, you do too. So, you know, semper gumby, right? Always flexible. That's the watchword. And, you know, you can have a plan. You can have an agenda for a conference, for example, as a plan. And, you know, you just got to roll with it.
It blows up in your
And
face
it just
the first
blows up
15 minutes.
Yeah, exactly. And so you just got to roll with it. All right. I want to be respectful of the time of our presenters here at Microsoft. And I also want to just give you guys a lot of credit. I think it would be a lot more comfortable to, you know, attend this conference and say, oh, everything is going great and there are no problems. And, you know, look what a great job we did. I think as engineers, honestly, we're kind of conditioned to say everything's fine, and, you know, then we'll turn around and, you know, try and behind the scenes make everything fine when it's not. But I think that as we're all working through this transition, it's extremely valuable to the industry to have people who are willing to share what the real experience is like, and especially when it's not a greenfield installation. Right. It's a whole different kettle of fish, right? So I just want to thank you guys for being willing to be candid. We really, really appreciate it.
Well, and I think.
Yeah, thank you.
I think.
Yeah, and maybe next year we can tell what really happened when we make it through this year.
Well, that actually already occurred to me that this is kind of like, you know, nobody makes a movie anymore. Everybody makes a series because it gets a subscription. So maybe we need to buy a subscription to this and check in with you guys next year and see how things have gone. Karl, you had to comment?
Yeah, I wanted to say thanks to Microsoft too, because they believed in our ideas. They listened to our planning. Man, we had hundreds of hours of planning discussions. Yeah. And we...
Well, and the design too.
Design and planning were going on in parallel. But I think had we not really opened up the needs assessments and looked at all of, or as many of the things we could think about that were going to cause us problems, things would be a lot worse. But, you know, there's nothing better than doing good planning.
Well, and it doesn't hurt to have good people, right, who are willing to participate in the planning. So
yeah, I mean, there are champions in every organization that you know, hey, the new box came in this afternoon. Nobody's told me not to open it. I'm going to open it, you know, and it's those people that are learning this stuff by the seat of their pants. So,
yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we do have some real rock stars all the way around in this project, and all of us are still learning, and it's been very exhausting, and I can attest to that, as we all can. But you know, the only way out is through. So here we go. So.
Excellent. Any closing comments, John, Jack, Andrew, and Karl?
No, I think this has been great. Thanks.
We'll let know how it goes. Round 2 next year.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. We appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
Take care.
Yeah. Enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you.